The warning wasn't written on the wall. It wasn't carved into a desk or hidden inside a maintenance manual. I found it in a spreadsheet. That's probably why it bothered me so much. If somebody discovers a message scratched into concrete, they immediately know something strange is happening. A spreadsheet feels different. A spreadsheet feels normal. Routine. Forgettable. The kind of thing nobody pays attention to until it's too late. I took the relay station contract because I needed money. That sounds like the beginning of a lot of bad decisions. And maybe it was. My divorce had finalized 8 months earlier. The apartment I moved in had thin walls, unreliable heat, and a parking lot full of broken vehicles that never seemed to move. I was 41 years old. I repaired telecommunications infrastructure for a living. Cell repeaters, radio towers, emergency broadcast equipment. The kind of systems people never think about unless they stop working. Work had been inconsistent for nearly a year. When the state contractor posted a 6-month assignment maintaining a timing relay facility in the mountains, I accepted before I finished reading the details. The pay was good. The housing allowance was decent. Most importantly, it was steady. The station sat on a ridge nearly 3 hours from the nearest city. The road climbed through dense pine forest before ending at a fenced compound containing a communications tower, 2 equipment buildings, backup generators, and a small residence where technicians stayed during their rotation. Nothing about the place felt unusual at first. The buildings were old. Not abandoned old, government old. Layers of upgrades built over previous upgrades. Different paint colors beneath newer paint. And used conduit running into sealed walls. Labels that referenced equipment removed years earlier. The station's primary purpose was synchronization. Emergency radio systems across multiple counties relied on precise timing references. My job involved monitoring equipment health, replacing failed components, maintaining generators, and logging signal integrity. Mostly it was boring. Boring sounded wonderful. I wanted boring. For the first few weeks, boring is exactly what I got. I woke up around 6, made coffee, checked overnight logs, walked the compound, inspected fuel levels, answered emails, ran diagnostics, repeated the process. The silence up there felt strange at first. Not unsettling, just unfamiliar. No traffic, no neighbors, no televisions through apartment walls. Just wind moving through trees and the faint electronic hum of equipment operating exactly as designed. Then I found the spreadsheet. I was reviewing archived maintenance records, looking for documentation on an aging synchronization module. The database contained decades of reports, thousands of files. Most were mundane. Voltage readings, repair histories, weather damage assessments. Buried inside one folder was a spreadsheet named final_shift_notes. There were 23 versions. Each carried a different date. Each was created by a different technician. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the contents. Every version contained exactly one line. Do not acknowledge the voices. Nothing else. No signatures. No explanations. Just that sentence. Repeated across nearly 20 years. At first I assumed it was a joke. Some kind of tradition. Technicians spend enough time isolated that weird habits develop. I laughed, closed the file, moved on. 2 days later, I heard the first voice. It came from a maintenance receiver during a signal verification check. The transmission lasted less than 2 seconds. Just enough time for a man to say, "Can you hear me now?" Then silence. The voice sounded close. Not radio distorted. Not static filled. Close enough that it felt like someone standing in the room. I checked frequencies. Nothing unusual. I checked logs. Nothing recorded. I convinced myself it had been interference. By that evening, I had almost forgotten it. Then I opened one of the older maintenance reports. Halfway through the document, buried between equipment readings, somebody had typed a sentence that didn't belong there. It wasn't highlighted. It wasn't formatted differently. Just inserted naturally into the text. I heard him too. The report was dated 12 years earlier. That's when I stopped thinking about the spreadsheet. The next morning, I went looking for more examples. Part of me expected to find nothing. A typo, a prank, some weird artifact from an old database migration. Instead, I found dozens. Not everywhere, just enough to feel intentional. A maintenance report from 2008 contained a note that read, "He asked for my name today." A generator inspection form from 2014 ended with, "Do not answer questions." A fuel delivery log included. Third week is when they usually begin sounding familiar. Every note appeared hidden inside otherwise legitimate documentation. None were obvious. You had to be reading carefully. The more files I opened, the more I found. Always brief. Always written by different technicians. Always sounding less like jokes and more like warnings. That evening I called my supervisor. His name was Dennis. I asked if he knew anything about unusual comments in archived records. There was a pause. Not a long pause, just long enough for me to notice. Then he laughed. Said old technicians got bored. Said isolation did strange things to people. Said I should focus on equipment performance rather than ghost stories. The conversation should have reassured me. Instead, it felt rehearsed. I couldn't explain why. Maybe because Dennis never asked what the comments actually said. Most people would. He didn't. He changed the subject immediately. The first real anomaly happened 4 nights later. I was performing a routine timing verification around 11. The process involved comparing local synchronization data against reference transmissions. Normally, it took 15 minutes. That night, one of the receivers briefly locked onto an unknown signal. The display flashed. A timestamp appeared. Then audio began playing. At first, I assumed it was an accidental frequency overlap. The recording quality was unusually clear. I heard a chair moving, a coffee mug being set down, then a voice. My voice. I froze. There was no mistake. It was me. The recording lasted perhaps 20 seconds. I heard myself say, "I'm probably going to open the cabinet tomorrow." Then the transmission ended. Silence returned. I sat there staring at the equipment, because I had never said those words. Not then. Not ever. At least I didn't think I had. The next day, I kept replaying it in my head. Open the cabinet tomorrow. What cabinet? The station contained hundreds. Electrical cabinets. Relay cabinets. Storage cabinets. The phrase meant nothing. Around noon, I entered Equipment Building B to replace a failing cooling fan. Near the rear wall stood a gray metal cabinet secured by an older lock. I had noticed it before, never paid attention to it. As I walked past, I remembered the recording. Open the cabinet tomorrow. The realization hit me hard enough that I stopped walking. Because it was tomorrow. Exactly tomorrow. I stood there for several seconds, then laughed at myself. I was creating connections that weren't there. Still, curiosity won. The cabinet wasn't listed on any recent maintenance schedules. After some searching, I located a key inside a lockbox. The door opened with a metallic groan. Inside were boxes, paper records, old binders, magnetic tapes, documents dating back decades. Most should have been archived elsewhere. Instead, they'd been stored up there, forgotten, or hidden. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading. The oldest material came from the late 1970s, back when much of the synchronization process relied on different equipment. What interested me wasn't the technology. It was the personnel records. Technicians transferred in. Technicians transferred out. Names, dates, routine administrative information. Then I noticed something odd. Several technicians appeared to have incomplete histories. Missing employment records. Missing transfer paperwork. Missing termination documents. Their files simply stopped, as though somebody had removed sections. One technician named Martin Weaver appeared repeatedly. Maintenance reports, inspection forms, shift notes, then nothing. No departure record, no resignation, no death notification, just absence. That night, I searched national databases, professional networking sites, public records. Nothing. No Martin Weaver. Not one result that matched. I assumed he had changed careers, maybe moved overseas. Maybe the records were incomplete. But once I started checking others, the pattern grew worse. Several names produced almost no trace. People who should have left decades of documentation behind simply didn't. It felt wrong. Not impossible, just statistically wrong. The following night, the receiver activated again. Same frequency, same clarity. Again, I heard my own voice. This time I sounded tired, breathing heavily, as though I'd been awake for a long time. Then I heard myself say, "Martin was real. The transmission ended. I immediately checked timestamps. No source, no origin, no recording file, nothing. The system acted as though the event never happened. I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of someone speaking outside the residence. The voice drifted through the darkness. Quiet, conversational. I couldn't make out words. Only cadence. The way people sound when talking to a friend. I looked through the window. The yard was empty. The voice continued. Not from outside. From somewhere deeper. Like sound traveling through walls. I walked through every room. The residence was empty. The voice stopped the moment I began searching. The next morning, I found a new file in the maintenance database. I know how that sounds. I understand why people would assume I accidentally overlooked it. Maybe I would believe that too. Except for one detail. The file carried tomorrow's date. Not next week's. Not a corrupted timestamp. Tomorrow. The file name read, Shift Report, Carter. My last name. I opened it. Inside were equipment readings, generator data, atmospheric conditions, routine observations. Everything looked normal, until the final line. Still believes the voices are recordings. I stared at the screen, then checked the date again. Tomorrow. The report supposedly hadn't been written yet. I printed it. The printer jammed halfway through. When I cleared the paper path, the final page was missing. Only the first pages emerged. The sentence never printed. When I reopened the file, it had vanished. No report, no record, nothing. I began documenting everything independently. Notebook, phone photographs, screenshots, backups on external drives. Partly because I didn't trust the system anymore. Partly because I was starting to distrust myself. Isolation affects people. I knew that. Every technician knew that. Sleep quality changes. Perception changes. You start assigning meaning to coincidences. I kept asking myself whether that was happening. Then I found Martin's journal. Not officially a journal. A composition notebook hidden inside one of the storage boxes. Most pages contained maintenance notes, signal measurements, repair schedules. Then gradually the tone shifted. His entries became personal, concerned, obsessive. One passage stood out. The transmissions aren't predictions. They are records. The problem is the events haven't happened yet. I read that line repeatedly, trying to understand it. Further entries became more fragmented. They disappear after acknowledgement. Names fade first. Never verify what the transmission claims. The station listens through confirmation. Then one sentence underlined 3 times. Reality here behaves like a draft document. I wish I could say I dismissed it. I didn't, because by then things were already changing. Small things at first. Text messages disappearing. Emails I remembered sending that no longer existed. A grocery receipt in my wallet from a store I had never visited. The kind of inconsistencies you can explain individually. Together, they became harder. One evening I called my sister, mostly because I wanted to hear another person's voice. We talked for nearly an hour. Toward the end, I mentioned my divorce. She went quiet, then asked what divorce I was talking about. I laughed, thought she was joking. She wasn't. For several uncomfortable seconds, she sounded genuinely confused. Then she remembered, or seemed to. The memory returned almost instantly. The conversation moved on, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. For a moment, something important had been missing. Not forgotten. Missing. As if a page had briefly vanished from a book before reappearing. That night, the receiver activated again. Only this time, it didn't play my voice. It played Martin's. At least I think it was Martin's. I had never heard him before. The man sounded exhausted. Older than I expected. His words emerged clearly through the speaker. Don't look for me. Several seconds passed. Then, if you're hearing this, I've already become part of the archive. The transmission cut out. And for the first time since arriving at the station, I seriously considered leaving.